Hello there. My name is Dr. Leslie Davis. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and a relationship therapist, and I'm located in a small town called O'Fallon, Illinois, which is right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Today, I want to talk to you about something that has been highlighted in the news lately, and it's about the life and the story of Sonya Massey. Now, if you know anything about the movement called Say Her Name, this is a story that should be highlighted by Say Her Name. We need to say her name. We need to keep her story alive. And if you haven't heard, if you haven't researched any of this, you might find some clips on YouTube, or if you just Google it, you'll find information about what happened to her life. Now, Sonya Massey was a Black single mother in Springfield, Illinois, and she called the police for help. She thought there was an intruder or someone around her home, and she was afraid, and she called them for help. Now, the police showed up, and in the end, Sonya Massey's life was taken. She was murdered by the police. It's unfortunate that that happened to her, and it's not a story that's unheard of, but we don't talk about it enough. One thing that is highlighted if you read any of the news clips about her is that she did struggle with mental health, and that's not uncommon either. In fact, about 70% of Black single mothers identify with symptoms of depression. Now, if you know anything about this podcast, if you've heard other episodes, that is something that I highlight in our journey of Black single moms. We struggle with depression, we struggle with anxiety for great reason. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what does depression look like for us as Black single mothers. Now, one thing you might notice about yourself is you might feel hopeless. You might feel helpless. You might tend to isolate yourself because you don't feel supported. And depression can sneak up on us where we feel like others don't like us and we feel like we're being judged, which will lead to isolation. Another thing to keep in mind is that we will have extreme fatigue or tiredness, and we might think it's because we're just doing so much that we're just exhausted, but it could be depression. But how do we know? Well, you don't know unless you go get the help, unless you go get a screening by a professional that can say, yes, you have a diagnosis of depression or you have a diagnosis of anxiety. But what really happens, we come across professionals all the time, especially if we're taking our children to the doctor. And there are screenings for us, but are we always honest with those screenings? Are we always honest with reporting our symptoms? And research shows that no, we're not. In fact, Black single women and Black single mothers, we don't tell our truth because there's so much that could happen to us if we do. So let's think about that. If we are honest with how we're feeling, with the dark thoughts that we might have, with any signs that we want to hurt ourselves, and if we tell someone about that, there's fear about what could happen to us and what can happen to our children. If we report our symptoms and we tell our truth, what could happen is, we might get hotlined. Maybe there's police that come in and they call child welfare and then our children are taken from us. That does happen. Not all the time, but it can happen. Another thing that can happen is, there's a stigma related to mental health in the Black community. We might think that if we tell our truth about all these symptoms we're having and we get a diagnosis, that we might end up on medication. And what is that medication going to do to us? We don't know. It's scary. You have a right to be scared about that. But let's get informed. Let's get some information, right? And that takes you taking the step of searching for a therapist or a professional that can explain these things to you. Taking medication doesn't mean that you're crazy, okay? Having a diagnosis of depression or anxiety doesn't mean that you're crazy. Most people have some sort of diagnosis that's undetected. It's underreported. Okay, so you're not alone in that experience. And across the world, people are suffering with depression and suffering with anxiety. We just don't talk about it. But we can see it in others, right? But we don't always want to admit that it's happening to us. And I get it. I was there. I struggled with symptoms of depression at a time, being a single mom, being alone, being isolated, not feeling like anyone cared. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't get the help. and I'm a therapist, right? But I'm here to help you. I'm here to give you this information just to open your eyes to your own life, to let you know that you don't have to be afraid to reach out for help. But let me get back to Sonya Massey in her life. So Sonya Massey called the police for help and they showed up, and she ended up becoming a victim of murder. Now, I want to share something personal with you. There was a time in my life where, again, if you know me, you know my story. I've been through several toxic relationships. Thank God I'm a survivor of those toxic relationships and I finally found love. But in those moments of toxicity, there was a time when I encountered intimate partner violence and I called the police for help. I was scared because I didn't know what to do. Honestly, at that time, I remember thinking, if I call the police, are they going to take my child from me? Why did I think that? Well, at the time, I was actually working in child welfare, and I had seen so many stories, real lives of clients that I worked with where their children were taken from them because someone called the police because there was domestic violence in their home. And I was afraid that was going to happen to me too. But my safety was in jeopardy, so I called the police for help. And what happened? Well, tables were turned, my story got twisted, and the police also threatened me to take me to jail, even though I was the victim. I asked them to help me because I was not safe. I was a victim of violence, but here I am being threatened of being called a perpetrator. And that was not the truth. So in my mind, police, I respect the police. I respect what they do. But there's always this lingering feeling and thought that, well, can I trust them? If that's your story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. As Black women in America, that is something that's always on our minds. Can we trust the police? And it's not just about trusting them to protect us. It's also about, are the police going to protect our children? When something bad happens and we're no longer here on this earth, who is here to protect our children? That's a fear that we all have, especially as single mothers. If we don't have the support from family or friends, who's going to be there to protect our children? Who's going to take care of them if something happens to us and we're no longer on this earth? And I can just imagine the life of Sonya Massey and her children who are left behind to take care of themselves. It's sad, it's heartbreaking, and this is something that has really been weighing on me the last couple of days. And I just pray for those children. I pray that the family and friends and the community supports them and surrounds them with love because they need it right now. But I also want us to consider the power of our voice. Our voices are so important. We have to tell our stories. We have to tell our stories of when we're hurt, when we are feeling down, when we are depressed, when we need help. But we have to know who we can tell those stories to. Not everybody needs to know, right? That's okay. So I want you to consider, who are these people in your life that you trust, that you can tell the truth to, that are going to support you, that are going to love on you, that are going to show up for you when you can't show up for yourself. For me, I'm grateful that I have a community of support through my family, through long-term friends, through church members, through my jiu-jitsu community. There are people that I know I can call on no matter what time it is, that they will show up for me. And I also realize that's not the case for everyone. And so what you also have to look into are there community organizations that are there to support you? For example, I have a community organization called Hearts and Faith, which supports single moms in my community. It's a place for single moms to come together to share their experience, not to rat on their baby daddies in any way, but to really share their struggles with each other. Because when we share our stories with each other, we empower each other. And that's the whole goal of She Matters. I am sharing my story with you to empower you. It's not to make myself look bigger or better, but it's really to show you that you can get through things. You can get through tough times. You can get through a toxic relationship and you can find love. You can find a community of support. It does exist for you. Now, if you're in that place where you feel like you're really struggling with your mental health, I will put some links in this podcast in the notes, but I just want to tell you real quick, there are two that come to mind, two resources for you. One is therapy for Black girls. Now, if you're a Black single mom, that's the place to go. There is a website that has links to Black therapists who are there to support you. You can put your zip code in there or the city where you live, and you can find a therapist in your local area. Now, if you want to, branch out into looking to a therapist that doesn't necessarily look like you or have your same lived experience, you can go to Psychology Today and you can look for a therapist there who can also give you information based off of maybe your religious background, or if you want a therapist that practices a certain type of therapy, you can search for things like that. I just want to let you know before I wrap this up that I care, I'm here, and I welcome you sharing your story with me. So if you would like to connect, you can find me on my website, which is therealdrleslie.com. Thank you for listening, and I want you to make sure you share this with another single mom that you know can benefit from hearing this information. And I also want to remind us to keep the voices of Black single moms uplifted and amplified. So I want to end this by saying her name, Sonya Massey. May she rest in peace.